This is Hollowbody, a game by Nathan Hamley, also known as Headwear Games. In this opening salvo, we control a woman in a biohazard suit, walking with another suited doofus, yapping about why they're here and the evil corporation that is screwing them over, because cyberpunk. After conversing with another load of TF2 pyros, our digital skin sack takes a vibey stroll to an ominous cave, looking for a missing goof called Mark. While looking into a seemingly bottomless pit, the camera creeps up onto our avatar. Oh, hi Mark. Slam cut to 12 days later, and our real avatar, Mika, is standing in front of a window smoking a Marlboro Red, chatting to a guy in hushed tones about a girl she's trying to track down. Cruising through the cyber streets in a hover Lambo, she does a Richard Hammond on the outskirts of town, and Meek has to find the highest point in this abandoned suburb to call the AA. And goddamn, look at this place. For a game set in my homeland, this has a vibe, and it's the first to capture what our suburbia truly feels like. The samey houses with mundane decorations, temporary cages built to house the working class and migrants who work themselves to death building the infrastructure that barely runs on time. A liminal hellscape where the mold creeps across these gaudy popcorn textured walls like a brutalist fungus. Its tedious streets silently screaming its song, which is of course Ghost Town by the Specials. And while your neighbours are a fine bunch, that mech taking up the communal dry space is annoying and might as well be a mirror to your own fragile sense of worth. Oh, sorry, I went all essayist on you. What I meant to say is, it looks pucker bruv, innit? Yes, that opening bit I was taking the piss, but there's no understating about how fucking cool Hollowbody looks. Granted, I have a soft spot for cyberpunk and post-apocalyptic shit, so this is my own preference talking here. However, there are very few of these worlds that feel lived in, and this emphasis on liminarity is what makes Hollowbody stick out to me. And while cruising through this apartment block, you will find these little windows into the world of the previous inhabitants and their personalities. And given the bleak tone, most of these fables are pretty fucking dark. But without them, the world would lack a certain punch, unlike the combat, or more specifically, the melee combat. And before I draw the line between it and its obvious influence, we have to remember that Mika isn't a trained badass, so having her swing a board with a nail in it, like a wet towel filled with ketchup, is appropriate. So while it's a bit disjointed in terms of feedback, the squirts of blood coming from each swing is satisfying. Anyway, talking about the interactive drudgery of survival horror games is as overdone as my constant jokes towards a certain French auteur. So let's talk about Silent Hill. Yep, any restless talk about the genre will end up in that foggy shit heap. But unlike some wordy wankers on this site, I'm not going to derail this fucking video for 40 minutes to say how much I love or loathe this shit. That said, you can't get away from the fact that Hollowbody is Hushmounds coded. However, unlike some of the examples we'll see in this journey, these callbacks are tastefully done. A knowing wink to the players of these games, while doing something fresh. And just like that badger trap filled with insufferable bellends aka fans, Hollowbody is drenched in symbolism, not only for our protagonist, but for the entire world. And through notes and other visual clues, we see how this catastrophe affected all walks of life. Just like this fine chap and fellow gaming influencer looking for their player too, which is an odd example, sure, but a fitting one, for this mundanity is being taken over by this biochemical miasma, so it's cute while being absolutely fucking horrifying. And it gives the game a playful mystery, and honestly I prefer this to being stonewalled by exposition. And yeah, I'm being vague for the sake of spoilers, but there was another element that made my trousers tighten like an ill-fitting thong: the music. Composed by Nathan, because he's basically the gaming equivalent of Dennis Waterman, the OST mostly leans on drones, atmospheric dirges of dread that keep the creepiness at the forefront without tiring your ears. cap it off, I really enjoyed my time with Hollowbody. It's a dark and gloomy experience that really cheered me up. Sure, I have a few groans about the destination, story-wise, but that journey was a ton of fun, and I'll defo check out anything from Headwear in the future. Alright, now we set the mood, let's talk about what I like to call Patient Zero. What you are looking at here is Banned Memories, created by Noah Paul, and is, well, just look at it. Do I need to elaborate? Okay, I'm being sassy, and yes, when I say Patient Zero, I mean for me, as this was the first indie game I saw on YouTube that was aping classic survival horror. And in this excited state, when I finally sat down and checked it out myself, my enthusiasm was quickly curb stomped. Granted, that was in 2015, and my tolerance for unpolished passion projects was non-existent. So take these bullheaded retro takes with a mountain of salt. And coming back to this demo nearly a decade later, I will give it to the dev. He was a child when he created this, so you can't be that mad. And in fact, I found its amateurishness quite endearing. So in this tetanus-filled mood piece, we play as Hideo, not Kojima obviously, who is skulking around Yamanishi Academy after a 3-year spree of illegal shit. So our lad is stuck in this place trying to work it all out, while being chased by Masahiro Ito's cutting room floor. So far so typical, as we have seen a glut of horror games set in a school in the last 2 decades. But saying that, yeah, this is basically Silent Hill 1.5. And not to drag those nuts fully across its face, as I do dig this setting, and the potential stories that could be told in this world, but yeah, there is a line between throwing back to a certain time and just being a lesser than. But as it's a demo, I can't really go hard on it, and seeing it as a springboard for would-be devs does make it charming. And in this state, it's more of a cheeky curio, and judging by the updates the dev has been doing recently, hopefully we'll see a better version of this game, probably when this fucking video gets uploaded, but oh well. This is back in 1995. Released 2 months before Banned Memories, made by solo dev Takaki Ichigo. In this one we inhabit Kent, a bloke that looks like this and sounds like his lines are spoken into a broken Nokia 5110.
So that's the tower.
And the reason why our boy is in this high-rise filled with penis monsters is cause he wants to escape to this mysterious tower over yonder, which I imagine is filled with blackjack and tired cultural references. But all he actually does, in the first part especially, is bum around doing odd jobs of this doctor until the game says stop. Which sounds like a diss, but actually I found this quite intriguing. Like, why are we in this building fighting through horrific mutated testicles, and why the save room OST is making me feel nauseous. Yeah, it's one of those games. And while it looks like it plays, and plays like it looks, the more I delved into its crusty depths, the more Back in 95 reminded me of Overblood. Its slow traversal giving away to this kooky vibe, like you're playing a fever dream after eating an entire multi-pack of mini cheddars. And yes, your eyes do not deceive you, the gameplay is stiffer than a family-sized pack of sounding rods. But saying that, Back in 95 is definitely on some odd shit. And while playing the game blind, you may focus on its shittier elements. But just as you think about jumping off this shit, just like our boy, this is where Back in 1995 reveals its party trick. After our lead takes a stage dive, the fourth wall gets pounded into the dirt by Takaki grabbing you by the proverbial t-shirt to tell you why this ditty was made so shitty. You see, the entire premise of this piece was made to deconstruct his own nostalgia, and what we played up to this point was an excuse to engage with this commentary. It's a middle-aged Trojan horse, if you will, and during this curtain pull, Takaki laments about this time in his youth when this insatiable desire to experience these crudely crafted worlds outweighed the perceived clunkiness of that said world. The thrill of discovering a game that no one seemed to have played but you. and in a world, before we were connected by a series of tubes, this feeling of discovery was raw. Hell, I vibe with this because when I was a kid, I too was a video game spelunker due to having a chipped PS1, and I would regularly be handed handfuls of burnt CDs, with my time being spent exploring these wacky worlds in languages beyond my mumble-mouth dialect. And it was fucking electric. And most if not all the games I played in this time moulded my tastes. And in a way, back in 95 made me realise that nostalgia can be used to invoke this feeling once again, rather than being what I pretty much despised about nostalgia in the modern day. That cynical, hey 30 to 40 somethings, do you remember place obvious shit here bullshit? But here, no, this feels pure, this feels genuine and heartfelt. And usually I hate explaining the mystery of any story, but this bait and switch and direct-to-player commentary is the sole intent of this story. And yeah, some would deem this pretentious, but I personally fuck with this, and in a way it's a perfect thematic frame for this video as a whole. Which brings me to my next question. Why PS1? For the longest time, I had a dismissive answer. Well, it's to pander to those previously mentioned knobheads that were raised in this warped textured era, and are now going back to the polygonal well to draw dithered water. And while that's still the case in some areas, I think there's something more to this aesthetic. And to show you what I mean, this is location Witheld by Bryce Butcher. A short, creepy point-and-clicker where you play as some dingus going through old police files about a string of unusual murders. And, as you can see, unless you have this video on in the background, so oi, pay attention, the presentation looks nice, clean, like the shrink wrap was pulled off it 10 seconds before you started the game. Yes, it does have some nostalgic adornments that will make my fellow millennials go, ooh! But as you can see, the look of this game is pretty typical. And sure, this is down to the engine of choice of most indie devs, Unity, but its inoffensive trappings feel familiar, if a tad sterile for my tastes. But then, riding in on its 4:3 aspect ratioed steed is the demake, which scraps the clean lines for the scraggy roughness of the PlayStation Uno. And straight away, the familiarity of the modern version, while alluring, now has this detached, grubby feel. And through this haze of pixels, we see the same room, yet its shimmering filter gives it an almost dreamlike quality. Even the design of the gameplay is different from the modern rendition, which was relying on your ingenuity to interface with this world, while the demake pauses the game to push these choices into your face in chunky fonts, which is in contrast to the visuals. There is no ambiguity here, you either do what you're told or not, with the clacky keyboard strokes reverberating off the walls with each choice, which all feeds back into this odd sense of isolation. The lush gradient of darkness being replaced with pitch blackness as you stare at a literal cosmic horror in the room. And this is where my original blunt take started to shift. Sure, like I said, you still get some examples eking back to this era for a cheap cash grab, but most use the visual language of the PS1 to help build a layer between the player and the game. Yes, we understand that we are in a fantastical world, the same world that can push all the realism your GPU can render, but this enforced low-finess gives us, the player, enough to fill in the gaps with our own imagination, which IMHO is far more frightening. However, like I said, this previous prepackaged assumption about polygonal priapisms wasn't born from a reasonable angle. It was spawned from another game creator, who was making the style of digital spookiness before the last two games I just covered. And his name is Puppet Combo. Ben Corcosa, aka Puppet Combo, is a developer who, while incredibly prolific, is terminally offline. So trying to gather a history to pad out this sentence has been a fruitless endeavour. Perhaps I should have just deleted this and written something punchy, but fuck it. From his early work in the 2000s under the guise of Pig Farmer Games, Ben carved a name for himself by creating the video game equivalent of Grindhouse, the era of media when the relative cheapness of video cassettes spawned a wave of independent filmmakers, making what the Brits called video nasties, which were cheaply made exploitation flicks with more gore and titties that you could shake your circumcised knob at. Okay, I don't like Puppet Combo's survival horror games. I know, I'm supposed to be open-minded, and trust me, games like Power Drill Massacre, Babysitter Bloodbath, and Nun Massacre grab my phallus, but actually playing these things? Nah, I'm good. Don't get me wrong, I think they're cool, but I feel that the games coming from the man himself reek of sublime ideas, but lack the polish to make them shine, which I do fuck with in a punky do-it-yourself kind of way. But to me, games like while looking like something I should be motorboating to an inch of its life, just gives me a headache. And while that is in line with the kinds of movies Puppet Combo wants to evoke, this quantity over quality approach to me hinders the games rather than helps. Like I said, I fuck with PC's art, and in his heyday making games every month must be incredibly cathartic, but nah, I'm not feeling this. And the people on his Patreon who get to play these hot slabs of knife edge irrelevance are now probably asking for my head. But before you kick down my door and decide to carry out that blood-soaked debauchery, games like Xmas Massacre always made me shatter kidney from laughing. With his blend of festive cheer, Rockstar's murder sim Manhunt, the boldy murderbolic Hitman, and the synthwave slashings of Hotline Miami, I am down for this kind of shit. Actually, Hotline was how this nut was originally bust, as he made a joke game for a video on his own YouTube channel. And I know I'm veering off topic here, but Xmas Massacre takes the crown for me as a game so over the top I can't help but love it. Its zippy pace and arcade scoring makes it a go-to brain-off game for me, where you turn the cast of Dude Where's My Car into cringeworthy hamburger meat. Also, as a former cinema employee, having a level where you murder the customers is a vibe I didn't know I needed. Wait. Is that a Cradle of Filth poster? He's a man of culture too. So while I'm wishy-washy on OG PC's SHs, his publishing arm, Torture Star Video on the other hand, fucking bangs. Which brings us to the first game under this label called Bloodwashed. And yeah, the titling of their games is a tad limited. Developed by the Black-Eyed Priest and Henry Hoare, Bloodwashed puts you in the unwashed shoes of Sarah, who is annoyed at her drunken BF for not doing the chores, and with a job interview in the morning, our protag needs some clean togs, or be faced with the shame of rocking up to a potential employer smelling like Russell Brand. Of course, she decides to do the former, but then she discovers that the wash machine in the creepy basement of her apartment complex is fucked, so Sarah decides to jump on a bus to the outskirts of town to the laundromat. But on her way back to her flat to grab her wallet, her neighbour informs her of a serial killer called the Womb Ripper, and with her being preggers, yeah, you can guess where this shit is going. Obvious plot bollocks aside, Bloodwashed has me on edge right from the bounce, with its oppressive atmosphere. And while the games coming from the main man didn't hit me, the reason why I decided to play this was down to my partner, who told me the bus sequence feels like some of her own experiences on late night public transport.
Hello. May I sit beside you?
There's plenty of other seats, so I don't see why you would need to do that.
May I sit beside you?
Are you deaf? Do I need to get the driver to throw you off?
You're going to die tonight.
If this is how it feels, then I'd rather stay at home and smell like shit. After that unbearable creepiness, we make it to the laundrette. And speaking of tension, my arsehole is tighter than James Corden's Rent Boy, especially when the game forces you to sit here waiting for your smalls to spin in real time. Yes, it's a cheeky way to build anticipation, but my god, it feels unbearable in the best way possible. Anyway, our heroine suggests we should take a leisurely stroll around the other shops, just to pass the time. But unlike Jarvis Cocker, instead of a supermarket, we end up in a video store, naturally. And yes, it does have a XXX section, filled to the brim with smut that will make your dad stand to attention. And speaking of creepy old bastards, the proprietor of this greasy gammon shop has a sense of drama.
Gotcha. So you're not stealing anything? My apologies.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I needed that bath bomb bowel movement, you fucking geriatric prick. And it's back to the laundrette to check if our Calvin Kleins have fewer skid marks than Donald Trump's tanning booth. And now you're probably thinking, is this a horror game or a depressing demake of The Sims? And hold on, my friend, shit is about to get fucky, but first we have to have another jump scare. And this is another thing I strongly dislike. To me, jump scares are like Greg Miller. Popular for some baffling reason, and perhaps seen him once or twice with a decent build-up is tolerable, but beyond this, yeah, not so much. So to me, jump scares are mostly shit. A punchline to a gag so played out it makes me irrationally angry. Not gonna lie, I was getting a bit of that sinking feeling of disappointment. Because I want to give these games a fair shake, but if I wanted to play a game that makes me squeal like Toby Turner, then I would rather teabag a cactus, or in less stupid terms, play something else. But in my irritated haste, I didn't realise that this is where the slow meticulous burn spirals into an orgy of violence, and in the back half, Bloodwashed goes from one extreme to another. Sure, it has the previously mentioned elements that I hate in horror games, but I quickly fell in love with how it uses these abrasive moments to goad you into these extremities. Sure, it's quite tiring to experience when you finish the game, but as it's the same length as VHS influences, this exhaustion hit me just as the credits roll. Basically, it's paced to perfection, and the world, while crass, never lets up. It blasts off on all caps while keeping you nuzzled in its musty armpit. And for me, it showed what you can do with the PS1 aesthetic. That purposeful divide between you and whatever you're looking at makes the realization of what is going on even more gross. So yeah, for an outfit that I found originally to be up its own ass, it turns out that I was the one with the self-anal problems. And also their latest release, and a loose sequel to Bloodwashed, Sniper Killer, is just as hilarious. Bottom line, there is no pretense here. Puppet Combo and his cohorts know what they are doing, and I respect the shit out of them and their craft. Their particular brand of boundless brutality isn't for everyone, but their punk spirit is infectious, and their catalogue is vast, so there is something here for any would-be horror game sicko. Okay, we've had our rusty takes at 80s filth, but where are the biohazards, the residential wickedness, the homes under the hammer yet somehow more scary, and other flowery-worded tossery? Well, stranger, I got something that might interest you. This is Them and Us, a game envisioned by Japanese studio Tendo Games, released using Steam's early access program in September of 2018, and then finally completed in 2021. And their mission statement for this magnum opus was simple: to make not just a survival horror game, but to make the survival horror game. Granted, that last bit was a lie, but in any bullshit there is a sliver of truth, especially when you see that these mad bastards want you to have the ultimate experience. Instead of a regional dev who will optimize their presentation and gameplay to a certain style, Tendo instead gives you the option to play their game in either first, third, or fixed camera perspectives, with added options for modern or tank controls, and most critically, what flavour of ice cream you want with your chocolate sponge. And once again, yes, that last option was sarcastic, but the amount of choice before you even play the game is a tad extra. Okay, it stops the petty squabbles on the online playground on what mode of locomotion is superior, but there's overemphasis on how you play the game. You would think this would bring a layer of needless jank to it, right? But surprisingly, no. As Them and Us plays well whatever you pick. Okay, personally the fix angles here have a tendency to be a tad scuffed in places, but then my nitpicks get pounded into the floorboards by the sheer amount of choice. And then we get into the intro, which is... just watch.
My name is Alicia Wallace. For the last 9 years of my life, I've been locked up for something that shouldn't have happened. I remember I used to be a medic, that I used to heal people. Yet I couldn't heal the most important person in my world, my daughter. My own fate has placed me squarely on the path to finding her. thanks to an arranged prison transfer and a macabre twist of fate that has all led to this moment. My name is Alicia Wallace, and I will find out what happened to my daughter.
I can't believe this story you're telling me. It's macabre.
So after that bus crash of art styles, Alicia wakes up in a spooky mansion, and her first point of call, naturally, is the closet, to change out of her boiler suit into something more fitting. And yes, there are sexy outfits, which I assume is a cry for help from the devs who haven't seen a real woman in fucking years. Now that Ali's attire matches the mood, we then look around this domicile in search of the thing that will unlock the next set of rooms. And straight away you may notice that this place is cockin' stunning. Yes, it is the Spencer Mansion for Wish.com, but for all the mansions I've seen in horror games, this one ranks quite high. But this discussion on the eye candy is rudely interrupted by the living impaired. So like any survival horror strumpet, she must decide to either run away, stab it with a blade, or later on, treat this undead dolt's ailments with a brisk injection of lead. Also, shout out to the copious use of ragdolls, and for the first couple of hours, Them and Us looks like a typical throwback. That's not rocking the boat in any way, just another finely tuned experience with some misplaced but cute delusions of grandeur, like the savoury music, being well-known orchestral comps. In a way, it sounds like a fucking episode of Action Button, but let's move on. Also, check out the atmosphere. The ghoulish drone of the OST complements the creaking of the floorboards as you briskly step between rooms. While the audio levels are all over the place, my god, it's trying to create a spooky vibe, and for the most part, it's succeeding. Just walking around the main hall is a feast for the eyes. The suits of armor you know will attack you later on, with the warm glow of the candelabras bouncing off their metal plates, and of course the dainty statues. It just screams opulence. Also, if you haven't noticed, this is all rendered in the Unreal Engine 3. Yeah, the engine that powered the PS360 era. Actually, this is one of the last games to be sold using UE3, released a year before the engine that followed it made way to a newer generation. Granted, this may be due to the budget, because yeah, you can tell there is a budget here, but it gives it this unicorn quality. A game out of time, if you will. But this is where the leak of underlying madness from earlier starts to stream, because deep inside this acceptable Jill sandwich, it's laced with enough chili sauce of bonkers ideas, it makes this opening chapter look like a completely different game. Especially when you discover that this mansion hosts a cult that wants to do something culty. I'm not entirely sure. Due to the story being so overloaded with ideas, it resembles a gaggle of Quantic Dream games in the cement mixer. But that said, using my galaxy-sized brain and staring into my crystal balls, I assume it's bad religion. Anyway, the best word to describe this game is loose. Just like a band jamming to whatever catches their senses, Lemon Party goes off on whatever thing the devs deemed cool at the time, giving it a woozy feel, which can work in horror, as it always keeps you guessing, but it can also lead to a stream of consciousness in its design that can be confusing, sometimes infuriating. But this wearing of its influences on its sleeve is endearing to me, if, once again, it's quite extra, as by the 5th hour of this game, that clocks around 20, the game beat switches to some cosmic Eternal Darkness style shit. And don't get me wrong, I love Eternal Darkness, but playing this after a while just made me tired. I fuck with its creativity, but its inability or flat out unwillingness to trim the fat makes me quite exhausted. Like I said, this isn't a bad thing, this is more of a taste thing, if anything else. But for me, trying to blast the player with endless stuff gets old quickly. So while I salute this with a rubber chicken slapped against my forehead in awe of its ridiculousness, the only way I want to admire it from now on is through 5 inches of bulletproof glass. Also, has anyone got the sudden urge to play Crazy Taxi, or is it just me? So, come on over and have some fun with Nightmare of Decay, a Resi Evil em-up spoffed into existence by an entity calling itself Checkmatey, who ended up on my radar with their 2018 game Rainfall, a delightfully retro slab of real-time strategy, Muso action, and city building, all wrapped up in a low poly RuneScape skin, which I had a mild obsession with during the pandemic. So when they announced their next game was going to be a survival horror joint, I was quite excited. So fast forward 4 years later, and we will see the fruits of this labour. And unlike our previous Undead shitpost, Nightmare is played entirely in first person, which doesn't sound like anything special at first, but shut your face, Jerry, I will get to my point in a second. And while we are drawing comparisons to the last game we just spoke about, NOD's opening exposition could fit inside a rat's bellend. You play as some nameless sap, living in his low poly apartment watching some shite on the Gogglebox, before he decides to eat supper, wash his crevices and go to bed. But during his late night ritual, our lonely chode hallucinates a brain eater in his front room. And what the fuck was in that pizza? Questionable lifestyle choices aside, we wake up to a title splash, and the shocking realization that you're no longer in your bed, but a shallow grave. Which is of course fodder for lazy YouTubers making obvious gags.
I live again.
But unlike a joke at your mother's expense, the tone of Nightmare from this point onward is delightfully silly, as your crypt keeper and helper throughout this caper is a talking cat. I like it, it's cute. And your first feline-based task is to enter the basement of this place and dispatch a former resident so you can grab the key to the front door. And of course do that scene that every zombie game should have by law. Anyway, after meeting Mr. Moon, we stroll through the front door. And yes, it's a Spencer mansion again, but this time even more deep fried. It's even simulating that monochromatic pixelated grime of the pre-rendered walls of the original RE. And while it is another COD rendition of this iconic backdrop, Nod has more of a creepy presence to me than the previous high effort but penisy rendition. And as we discover there is no more room in hell and the dead do indeed walk this earth, the only way to deal with this snafu is to turn these Frankenfurters into bloody chunks. And the way Nightmare marries survival horror with another archaic genre raised my eyebrows at first. If the crosshair wasn't a giveaway, the gameplay is very reminiscent of military sims like the original Rainbow Six. Granted, the original game now feels like a spreadsheet program built for xenophobic spods, but this pseudo-realistic approach to the shooting was to incentivize the use of careful planning and tactics, and failure would be met with sudden death like the crypto-fascist pig dog you are. So Nightmare using these mechanics leads the player to use a measured approach, which I quite enjoyed, and it's easily some of the most satisfying zombie blasting this side of Left 4 Dead. And whatever hangouts I may have had when I first started this game, they were swept away with the guns sounding like a fucking war crime. And while I could giddily talk about the boner-inducing violence for another 2 hours, I want to explore the tone some more. And from the bounce, Nightmare of Decay is telling you that it's fully aware of its irreverence, and these mirth-filled stabs are just a tickle rather than the full course. In a way, it's the polar opposite of its influences. Also, Nod avoids the trap that most comically written games fall into of being annoyingly smug, as it's mostly too busy surprising the player with regular spooky set pieces that strike this balance between guffawing like a twat and spontaneously shitting out of every orifice. Sure, it has a bit of that random lol thing, but when a weird creature that lives in the war asks you to gather 3 femoid zombie heads for a gift, I'm not gonna lie, I got a pretty hearty chuckle from it. And as you can probably gather, I am a big fan of Nightmare of Decay. Its minimal yet deceptive design is fun, and its jabs and pokes at tropes made me really attach myself to it. While it's not a title with a story that will stick with you, its world and gameplay will, and I found its Devil May Care tone quite refreshing. And speaking of first person shoot bangs, I think we need to go full ham. Yeah, that's right, curveball time. This is Cultic, in what the cool kids call a boomer shooter. Made by Jason Smith, or JSOS Games if you want to be all MySpace about it. And before we get into this, I will cut those pedantic knobs at the knees and acknowledge that this isn't a quote real survival horror game, or whatever bollocks that avalanche of pig-headed gatekeeping fuckwits say in their breathy tones. Whatever. as Jason himself made a post that one of the influences for Cultic was Resident Evil 4, and the further we go in, you can feel the cold hand of Leon on its shoulder. But unlike its fellow Boomy 2 brethren, Cultic is experimenting with a ton of gameplay concepts outside of its mold, which makes its seemingly meat-headed veneer reveal itself into a hoedown of horror and action, so tight you could use it as a bottle opener. Also, I should have waited to make that blood reference. And before I give this game the biggest gum job ever, we play as John Cultic, a hard-boiled former Rozer on the edge, kicked off the case and consumed by an industrial-sized vat of whiskey and rage. But like most 3EM strokes of pissed-up genius, our lad gets his shit pushed in and wakes up in a pile of bodies outside of their town. So with the biggest hangover, he picks up a hatchet and chops a few cloaked trees. And from here, unlike its contemporaries, the game rewards you for taking a considered approach, rather than going full power fantasy. Sure, you will become a circle strafing fucker later on, but just like a typical survival horror game, the limited ammo and stingy health pickups are the order of the day. Yeah, shit's hard, but I like how it pushes back. Also, Cultic is laced with quite a few fun, creepy set pieces. Like this one, that didn't catch me off guard and didn't make me squeal like a banshee, as Mr. Chainsaw gave me a new asshole to shit from. Nah mate, I was totally in control, and just like Nightmare of Decay, it's another game with this dirty, desaturated look, which gives it that pulpy atmosphere. And it also uses voxels for items, but instead of making the game look like a cursed Minecraft mod, it's arousing those grubby retro looks without using shortcuts. And that's the game in a nutsack. Cultic is stuffed to the gills of reverie for the 90s and 2000s that any other creator would have bungled and turned into a shallow nostalgia fest. Its confidence and vision make it a perfect crossover of styles that I love dearly, and a perfect spot on this list that means nothing in the grand scheme of things apart from warming the cockles of my micro penis. Hell yeah, little man, hell yeah. This is Lake Haven, Crysalis, and if your brain hasn't melted by now watching this shit, LHC is a prologue chapter to the main game, but unlike a demo, this vertical slice isn't free. However, this meager expense gets you one chungus of a game. And just peep this title screen. If that doesn't make you frothy, then we cannot be friends. In this interactive Happy Meal, you inhabit the sharp suit of, and I say this with a straight face, Detective Zeke Reynolds, who is making a call to a spooky house, which seems to be abandoned. Yet by the satanic adornments in the back garden, and this cool-ass shallow grave, yeah, you can tell something ain't right. But being a man versed in quickie mysteries, Zeke, sorry, that's just a goofy name, manages to survival horror his way around. And the first thing I love about Lake Haven is how dense this place is. It has this wonderful sense of flow, and that thrill of finding one thing that unlocks another, which leads into a puzzle and so on. And this might be one of the best examples of that, but then gives you these other little snippets, like when I found a literal needle in a haystack. And yes, that nail can be used to unlock a secret homage to PT. And while that's a tired thing right now in horror games, I can't deny it, that's fucking cute. And that best describes the game in general. It has this verve going through it, which I found absolutely compelling. And while spooky in places, it has a coziness to it which is quite understated, but incredibly welcome. And I could go on, but like I said, this is a short and sweet one, and I don't really want to ruin it, as it's a game worth going in blind. Also, the savoury music is sublime. Yeah, it kind of reminds me of... Oh, this isn't me making a PS1 style rendition of the Twin Peaks intro. Nah, this is footage from a fan game. Twin Peaks Into the Night by Blue Rose Team is a lovingly created homage to the show, and goddamn, just fucking look at it. Look at Agent Cooper's flat face. Oh, I love it. And oh god, it is so weird playing a TP game after playing tons of others that try to capture its spirit. Like sure, examples like Deadly Premonition go off on their own tip, but I will admit, playing this demo I had to pinch myself a couple of times just to confirm I'm not dreaming. Also, I fucking love how it's a mashup of survival horror with the camera angles and the RPG NPC chatting like in Mizuna 4's. And like I said, this kind of tripped me out. It's like the inspiration has finally become official, especially when these games have been cribbing off this show for fucking decades. Granted, what you're playing really is like the abridged version of the pilot episode of the show. So if you're already a Peaks enjoyer like I am, you've seen this already. But having that layer of interactivity did make it novel for what it is. Alright, sure, I did geek out over some of the little particulars, such as the PS1 pixelated PNGs for the intro were really hecking my shit. And with this demo ending with a leisurely stroll around the Black Lodge, I adore this demo. And hopefully if it doesn't get struck down with DMCA, we may be able to get a full game out of this one day. I'm skeptical, but goddamn, if it does come out, there'll be a game with Asylum on it for sure. And as we are taking a look at a few demos, this next one is so fucking drippy, even the save screen fucks. Oh yeah, quick save on my Justin. Oh god. Sorry We're Closed by Alan Mode Games is a fucking vibe. Just look at our main girl in her pink fur jacket, bratty punk band t-shirt, and shit kicker boots. Alright, I have no sense of fashion, but there is no way you can see her drip and not look away. And yeah, as a 40-year-old man saying that shit, I may be cringe, but I am free. And what grabbed me straight away was the trailer, which I just came across by accident one day. It just has this swagger to it that makes you stop and stare. I mean, how many horror game teasers do you know that has a trap OST?
Wrong with my infinite wisdom, follow my words even if I contradict them.
Exactly. And playing this thing just flooded my brain with other faves. Killer 7, Shin Megami Tensei, Catherine, hell, even Silent Hill gets a fresh spin, with our lead's third eye, turning this fuckheap into a normal place. And let's not forget the combat, which is very reminiscent of D2. Fuck yes. And this trans flag coloured world is brimming with so many cool ideas. It almost boggles my mind to find the words to truly express how I feel about it. And just like Hollowbody, if it wasn't for this trailer and then demo, this video would probably not exist. Because as soon as I saw this gay AF Suda 5-1 style joint, this is what makes my obsession with this art form so strong. And for someone who loves this genre and hasn't really dived into the indie side as much, this was the perfect excuse to go all in. And it's also queer as fuck, which makes me smile. Oh, there's gonna be a video about this, without a doubt. If there was a word to sum up Crow Country, it would be nostalgia. Sure, I could accuse CC of cheating because it's using the PS1 graphics to that type of effect, like I said earlier, but fuck that cynical shit. Crow Country is really flicking my warm and fuzzy love spuds. And just looking at it digs up those old memories of penisley pre-renders and game mags that would give you an idea of how the game looks over the eye strain of looking at these tiny screenshots. Granted, here it's cute and nowhere near as cursed, but there is a certain vibe with this type of look, which makes it nostalgic, yes, but also makes it feel new and fresh. And the character we play is representative of this new twist. Mara has a simple yet striking look, perfect for fan art and cosplay. She's got that Jill Valentine in Resident Evil 3 aura of being simple yet punchy. And that is not just a surface level observation, as she is a pint glass filled with sass, with little quips strewn all over the place with her sardonic observations. It's like they were channeling Heather Mason and Aubrey Plaza while coming up with her design. and her dry wit kept me going, as the game itself, while fun, had a few elements that were not to my taste. While dropping you into this diorama to work out shit has its allure, it does this with little or no signposting, which is great for immersion, but this lack of pushing you in the right direction in the early game feels aimless. And it did put me off at first, but then coming back to it a couple days later, I managed to grasp what I needed to do. Another thing that was twanging my taint was the camera. I like you have the ability to move it freely, but the way it's kind of top down but zoomed in made this freedom nauseating, and I get it, they're trying to make it claustrophobic, but to me it was a little too close. Luckily with the power of PC mods I was able to pull the camera back a pinch. Sadly you can't mod out the traps and other things that poison you at random, which I get why they're here, they're trying to evoke the tension, but it's quite obnoxious. But once I got past these annoyances, there is a lot to like, especially the masterstroke of this world being set in a theme park. Okay, masterstroke may be a bit OTT, and perhaps my fatigue for mansions is talking here, but the variety from room to room was a delight. And it captures that childlike wonder of discovery, with mundane corridors tunneling between these playful areas. It's got a best of both worlds thing, it's liminal but it's also wild and chaotic. I like it. Even with my gripes, there is a sense of fun flowing through this, like a strawberry swirl, and a breezy tone that develops into something creepy and interesting later, but its tweeness is infectious. Okay, perhaps my blood sugar may have spiked to a dangerous level in places, but just like another spooky muffin that I love dearly, Luigi's Mansion, I can see what Crow Country is trying to do. They want to be more broader reaching, and I could see this being a gateway drug for people who have never played this type of game before. It's got a little taste of what survival horror has to offer, and even with some of its rougher edges, I fuck with it. Like I frick with the next game. Yes, these transitions are fucking shit. Now, pop quiz. Have you ever bought a random game and within 5 minutes you feel like it was specifically made for you? Well, Kwaidan Azuma Manor story is one of those. Just look at the splash screen. It's so fucking good. And check out the Sega Saturn porno music in the title screen. If this doesn't make you pelvic thrust on the verge of tears. Oh god, I've been recording for too long. And as you can see, while it's taking a lot of elements of survival horror, it's also channeling dungeon crawlers in point-and-click adventure games, which in a way, those two genres were proto-survival horror in many ways. Oh no, whoa, what's this flashing on the screen? Oh, is it a cheeky plug for Stoke Matty's video on this subject? But for me, Kwaidan's main influence is from software, pre-Souls of course, the languid movement, with the awkward combat, the eerie atmosphere, and the music which doesn't really suit the mood but kind of fits. And of course having a difficulty curve that flips between acceptable to fuck me this game is hard. And in an age where gaming is trying to spread itself into an acceptable yet flavourless paste, these hard but fair morsels are a rare breed, and my god. The moment I clapped eyes on this when I saw 4 high heels cover it, I knew this was a game for me. That being said, however, it's something that might be a bit too quirky for some. Like right now, you are looking at the image of this game and it looks like it should be on the PSP or the Sega Dreamcast, with the usual tight 4:3 aspect ratio and all the trappings of a game from that era. But let me show you how it actually looks. Yeah. These are where those comparisons come from, because while I love the look of this UI, it is a chunky bitch. And to use items you need to mouse over them and click, which feels intuitive enough, and this doesn't seem out of place, but the main control of the character isn't point and click, it's tank controlled. So you have this weird dual layer of control, where you're running around attacking shit while using the right stick to control the pointer. And at first this feels like you're rubbing your belly and giving Godzilla a Dutch rudder at the same time, but with like most of these older style games, you do fall into a groove with it. And after a while, it does feel kind of natural. And with the inventory being on the main screen, your attention is never broken. This is a subtle effect, but it's a great way to keep you on edge. Not in a horror game sense, but it does develop this unique paranoia that when you do look at your inventory, you're not going to get jumped by some weird bouncing thing trying to tear your face off. Alright, maybe this part is kind of Souls-like, but yeah, it brings a unique mood. And chunky is the word that best describes Kwaidan. When I name dropped the PS penis in the Dreamcast, it wasn't just an awkward opener. No, the look of Kwaidan is so of that era, it bloody hurts. The blurry textures, the shimmer of the straight lines from the lack of anti-aliasing, and the bold poly character models all scream of this era. And to be honest, this look is far more appealing to me than this PS1 styled love fest that's been going on for the last decade. While a ton of the games I've covered in this video use retro aesthetics to make you feel foamy for that time, Kwaidan takes it to another level, as it's unashamedly retro in every way. While the story setup is sparse, it does just enough to push you to explore, and the atmosphere is just sublime. While incredibly obtuse, Kwaidan, to me, is goated. Yeah, it's not for everyone, but its unflinching design and hearty challenge kept my foxtail buttplug waggling for the entire runtime. It's defo one for the freaks. Which brings us to our final stop on this journey, and while I didn't put these games into any sort of ranking order, Signalis to me is the main event, and in a way the final exam of this genre, because all the stuff I've said so far applies to Signalis tenfold. Okay, apart from the sexy outfits, thank fuck, but its reputation for being survival horror perfection did give me pause for thought, but I did keep my eye on it. But right off the bat, it's defo on some avant-garde shit. This isn't some guy trying to rub assets together in a vain attempt to create something. Every minute detail has been worked on to an almost psychotic degree. And while I've labelled some of the creators of these games as being nerdy about survival horror, this is some turbo nerd geeky shit. Created by Yuri Stern and Barbara Whitman, inspired by anime, Lovecraft and our boy D. Lynch, Signalis takes from these moods and shapes them into a game that harks back to its forebearers with an added harsh cyberpunk edge. After crashing down on an unknown planet, our replicant, Elster, searches for a human partner, and we quickly find out this place feels off, like we're stuck in a dream, which is convenient because it is. Anyway, after this non-starter, she begins her quest proper, skulking through a mining colony where most of the inhabitants have turned into twisted abominations. And I don't mean Scousers. However, unlike the games we have covered so far that were kinda liberal with items and ammo, Signalis takes the inverse approach, as the survival part of survival horror is heavily emphasized. With only 6 slots in your inventory, later upgraded to 8 in a patch, the loop of collecting what you need when you need it is paramount. Luckily it does employ the magic box to store the extra guff, but the micro loop of inventory Tetris is now one of the key puzzles and elements of making your way through this place. And while I found the complaints by people that Signalis is backtracking the game amusing, after playing it I would half agree, as the thing I got hung up on is not this but the quite frankly dull in quotes puzzles Signalis seems to rely on. For every safe code puzzle, there were another dozen where you had to find a key to open a door, or a cipher that looks interesting but is insultingly easy. But I will say using the radio to tune into shit to work out some of these brain ticklers gave me Metal Gear Solid vibes, and its use was pretty novel and added an extra layer to these dull puzzles that I did kind of enjoy. And I could continue to complain about the repetition, but doing so undercuts the point of what the game is trying to imply. And I don't want to blow the story load, but I respect the devs for going for the throat in this way. No AAA studio would make their game personally abrasive to invoke a mood within a player like this, not when overheads are so unfathomable. And even with games on this side of the fence, openly trolling the player is a ballsy move. A fair chunk of my playtime with Signalis, I thought everyone going head over heels for it was fucking out of their mind. In fact, I almost dropped it a couple of times, but then the little goblin in my noggin, called Stubbornness, was kicking my front seat. It just felt like something was there, but I couldn't really see it at that time. So with salt in my meatus, I kept going. And then I finally beat the first playthrough, and once again, I was kinda down on it. Surely this wasn't the complete story, right? And no, it wasn't. And that's when I fell down a rabbit hole of hundreds if not thousands of posts from people trying to work out what the story means, with endless threads on every scant detail, trying to decode and detangle this web of intrigue. And that's where the lightning bolt hit, because due to burnout or just playing so many goddamn games in a row, I completely missed the point of what Signalis is trying to go for. And looking at all these wild and wacky ideas and expressions and conspiracy theories about it through these boards remind me back to a time in the early 2000s when I would do the same, where I'll go on and talk about Metal Gear or Silent Hill. Granted, I grew out this phase a long time ago, because trying to Discord with these people now makes my fucking brain hurt, but I would be lying if I wasn't charmed by this connection. I don't know. Maybe seeing these game likers spend hours of their lives going full Pepe Sylvia on this just warms my heart. And while my takes on the outcome of Signalis are mine and mine only, seriously just play the fucking game, it's cool to see this side of the community coming together in such a wholesome way. So while my initial thoughts on Signalis were mixed, I kind of love how it put me through the ringer. It's masochistic in a way that serves the story, and everything you do and everything you experience all fold into the narrative being expressed, and that's fucking cool. And this might be frustrating for you listening to me ramble on about it, because I'm not going into the particulars, and perhaps we will expand on this in a video on its own. But all in all, I am in awe how boldly it takes its narrative to places a rare few go. It's a bloody triumph, and in a way, Signalis is a fitting end to this video. So yeah, indie survival horror games get a thumbs up from me, unless it's fucking Dino Break. More like Dino Break these nuts.